Vorath-7 had seen armies before. He had catalogued 43 distinct military forces across the known galaxy, from the crystalline-scaled Drenathi shock battalions to the six-limbed Karath siege-walkers who could level a mountain if you gave them enough time and a particularly bad mood. He had watched the Velorani deploy their infamous Mind Spear formations, which, admittedly, gave him nightmares for about 3 standard cycles. He had even, and this he did not discuss at diplomatic functions, witnessed the Gorethian meat grinder campaigns of the Outer Spiral, which were less military strategy and more aggressive geometry involving living things. So when Ambassador Vorath-7 of the Plethian Observation Corps floated into Galactic Council Seat 12 and opened his briefing packet on the species-designated H-class, Sol 3, common self-designation human, he was not, technically, expecting anything that would require him to update his medical emergency protocols. He updated his medical emergency protocols within 40 minutes. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. The year was, in galactic standard reckoning, the 412th cycle of the Unified Accord. Humanity had been a provisional member of the Galactic Council for exactly 9 of those cycles, 9 years of diplomatic hiccups, confused trade agreements, and what the Council's chief xenolinguist Salveth Prin described in her official report as a species that negotiates like they are simultaneously trying to make friends with you and win an argument they started in their own head. The humans had arrived loud, curious, occasionally alarming, and carrying an inexplicable number of snack foods that they offered to literally everyone, including species without mouths. They were, in the polite consensus of the Council, a curiosity. Harmless, energetic, like a small mammal that had somehow learned to file paperwork. Then came the Vorkai incursion. Now, the Vorkai, and if you have not encountered them, consider yourself fortunate and also slightly boring, were what xenomilitarists generously called an expansionist hegemon, and what everyone else called the reason 3 solar systems had stopped responding to communications. They moved in geometric wave formations. They did not accept surrender as a concept, and their flagship commander, a being named Skrath-Ul who had approximately the warmth of a dying star and significantly less charm, had been carving through the outer sectors for 11 cycles without anything resembling resistance that lasted longer than a week. The Council had sent diplomatic envoys. The Vorkai had sent them back in smaller pieces. The Council had proposed sanctions. The Vorkai had responded by sanctioning an entire inhabited moon out of existence. The Council had convened 17 emergency sessions. The Vorkai had used this time productively, conquering 2 more systems. It was, to use a human expression that Vorath-7 had picked up and could not stop using, not going great. The session on the 412th cycle, day 209, was the 18th emergency session. High Arbiter Thesivane Mur, a counselor of the Prethali species, presided with the particular expression of someone who had stopped sleeping 3 sessions ago and had fully committed to the lifestyle. Her 4 secondary eyes were half closed. Her primary pair had the focused, slightly desperate look of a being who had placed all remaining hope in a single agenda item and was quietly terrified of what that item might say. The agenda item was seated in the provisional member section, eating something crunchy out of a small bag and apparently showing a video on a personal communications device to the counselor from Veth Nara, who was making a sound that translated roughly as confused but intrigued laughter. The human delegation, Thesivane Mur announced, with the tone of someone who had rehearsed this moment and was now watching it deviate from every rehearsal, has submitted a formal response to Resolution 779 regarding the Vorkai military situation. The human delegation consisted of 3 individuals. Vorath-7 had their dossiers memorized. Commander Itzel Puente, Earth Defense Coordination, decorated veteran of what the humans called the Europa Incident, which their own records described with extraordinary understatement as a significant defensive engagement. Dark eyes, posture like a compressed spring. The kind of stillness that Vorath-7 noted was not relaxation, it was loading. Admiral Kwame Asante Birago, Joint Fleet Operations, Earth Proxima Coalition? Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, with a voice like geological events. He had spent 40 years commanding what humans called their Blue Water Navy before the species had looked up and decided the ocean did not have enough frontier in it. And then there was Dr. Priya Nambiar, Strategic Doctrine Advisor. Civilian, small, wore spectacles, which was a vision correction technology that the species had also managed to make a fashion statement somehow, because of course they had. She had 3 doctorates, 2 of which were in fields that other species had not invented yet, and she was the one, Voratha 7 had quietly learned, who had written the actual response to Resolution 779. Dr. Nambiar was not eating snacks. She was reading, very calmly, from a physical document which was either charmingly archaic or a deliberate psychological choice. Vorath 7 had met enough humans to suspect the latter. Thasavan Mur straightened. Commander Puente, the Council acknowledges your response and invites formal presentation. Itzel Puente stood. She did not use notes. She looked around the chamber once, the way Vorath 7 imagined. A person checks a room before deciding how much of a problem it is going to be. High Arbiter, Council members, she said, and her translator rendered it in 47 languages simultaneously. The Earth Proxima Coalition accepts operational responsibility for the Vorkai incursion response. We are prepared to commit forces immediately. We ask for 3 things: corridor access through sectors 14, 19, and 23, logistical resupply rights at Methkara Station, and for everyone else to please stay out of our way. Silence. Not the polite silence of consideration. The alarmed silence of 47 species suddenly doing the same mental arithmetic and arriving at the same confused answer. Councillor Drevan, the Kurath representative, who was 7 feet of cautious military professionalism and had been fighting wars since before humanity had invented the wheel, leaned forward. You are proposing to engage the Vorkai. Alone. We prefer independently, Puente said. Less paperwork. The Vorkai, Drevan said, very slowly, have a fleet of approximately 900 capital vessels, supported by an estimated 14,000 sub-capital attack craft, with Skrath Ul's flagship alone rated at a threat level that caused 2 council member species to voluntarily relocate their home systems. Yes, Puente said. We've read the briefing. The largest fleet the Council has assembled in the last 50 cycles, Drevan continued, numbered 300 vessels, and it achieved what our records diplomatically call a strategic withdrawal from the Vorkai's advance edge. Also in the briefing, Puente said. And you are proposing, Drevan said, arriving at the part he clearly found most difficult to articulate, to respond to this with a human military force. Correct. How large? Asked Councillor Seal Vathari of the Meth Prathali, in a tone suggesting they were bracing for something embarrassing. Is this force? Admiral Asante Birago spoke for the first time. He had not stood. He did not need to. Combat active, 412 capital ships, 22,000 sub-capital vessels, 900,000 deployed ground personnel, and what we call our strategic reserve, which I'm not going to itemize because some of it is need to know and some of it would genuinely take too long. Another silence. Different texture this time. Vorathemph watched the room recalibrate. 412 capital ships was more than the Council had expected. It was, in fact, more capital ships than the Council had known humanity possessed. The intelligence reports, and here Vorathes felt the first cold draft of professional failure move through him, had estimated Earth Proxima military capacity at roughly 1/4 of that figure. Thesivane Mur's 4 secondary eyes were now fully open. Those figures, she said carefully, are not consistent with Council intelligence assessments. Dr. Nambiar looked up from her document. She had the expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. No, she agreed pleasantly. They're not. May I ask, Vorath 7 heard himself say, because professional horror has a way of becoming verbal. How the discrepancy is so significant. Nambiar tilted her head slightly. You were counting our ships. We were. You counted the ones we let you see. The room did something that Vorath 7 had never seen a Galactic Council session do in 412 cycles of recorded history. It went entirely, completely, unanimously quiet. Puente let it sit for exactly 3 seconds. Vorath 7 counted, before she continued, and her voice was entirely conversational, the way someone is conversational when they are choosing not to be theatrical about something theatrical. We've been a provisional member for 9 cycles. We've had diplomatic incidents, cultural misunderstandings, and one very confusing trade agreement involving something called hot sauce that we'll table for another session. What we have also had is 9 cycles of watching this council try and fail to address the Vorkai situation. We had time. Time for what, precisely? Thesivane Mur asked. To build, Asante Birago said, and the geological weight of his voice gave the word exactly the gravity it deserved. Drev An had been quiet for several exchanges. The Karath counselor had fought 17 wars. He had the eyes of someone counting, calculating, recalculating. Your ground force figure, he said slowly. 900,000 deployed personnel. Deployed means currently active, not reserve. Deployed means boots on transport. Ready for insertion within 72 hours of corridor access confirmation, Puente said. Reserve is separate. How? Drevan said, and for the first time in 9 cycles of observing him, Vorathau Zevon detected something in the Karath's voice that he had never expected to find there. Large is the reserve? Puente glanced at Asante Birago. Something passed between them. Not uncertainty, more like the silent confirmation of 2 people who had discussed exactly how much to say in this room and had made a decision. Asante Birago nodded. Fractionally, Puente looked back at the council. The Earth Proxima Coalition maintains a standing total military of approximately 12 million personnel. That is the regular force. Humans also have what we call reserve and militia structures, trained, armed, registered, which bring the available pool in a full mobilization scenario too. She paused. Just half a breath, around 800 million. Vorath 7 became aware that he had ceased operating his secondary respiratory function. He restarted it manually. 800 million. The Vorkai, at full force projection, could field perhaps 40 million combat effectives, and that number had caused 3 species to relocate their home planets. 800 million. That is, Seal Vathari said, in a very small voice. A very large number of soldiers. We've had a lot of practice, Nambiar said from behind her document, with the serene tone of someone recounting historical facts. With needing them, Vorath Theven looked around the council and realized, with the particular clarity that arrives when your entire professional framework requires emergency restructuring, that every other counselor was experiencing the same thing he was, not fear exactly. Something more complicated than fear. The sensation of standing very close to something that was always there, that you had simply, catastrophically chosen not to look at directly. Humanity. 9 cycles of snack foods and cultural misunderstandings and enthusiastic friendliness and show-up-to-everything energy, and they had been doing this, quietly, systematically, with that particular human quality of preparing for the worst while smiling at you across a diplomatic table and offering you something called a protein bar. The entire time, Drev An broke the silence. He was the only one in the room, Vorath 7 suspected, who had the military experience to break it without it being ridiculous. You want corridor access and resupply rights, the Korath said. You do not want combat support. We will accept logistical coordination, Puente said. Combat command stays with us. You understand that if you fail, Thesivane Mur said, the Vorkai will have an unobstructed approach to the core systems. Yes, Puente said. She did not say we won't fail. She did not say we've got this. She said yes, acknowledged the consequence, and waited. It was the most terrifying form of confidence Vorath 7 had ever encountered. Thesivane Mur looked at her. Then at Asante Birago. Then, inexplicably, at Dr. Nambiar, who had returned to her document and was making a small annotation with a physical writing instrument, apparently unbothered by the fate of the core systems currently being discussed around her. The High Arbiter of the Galactic Council, keeper of 412 cycles of unified accord precedent, looked at this collection of loud, snack-bearing, undercounted, 800 million strong mammalian upstarts, and made the only decision available to a being who had just discovered that the most dangerous thing in the room had been the one offering everyone food. Corridor access, she said, granted. Methkara resupply rights granted. She paused. The council will observe. Puente nodded once, crisp and final. Then we'll get to work. She sat down, reached over, and took a handful of whatever Admiral Asante Birago had apparently been concealing in a bag under the table, and ate it with the absolute calm of someone who had just finished a mildly interesting meeting and was thinking about lunch. Vorith 7 stared at his briefing packet. He looked at the intelligence assessments. He looked at the notes he had made across 9 cycles. He thought about every moment he had watched humanity and filed them under curious but non-threatening. He opened a new file. He titled it, in Plethian, a phrase that translated roughly as, Things I Was Comprehensively Wrong About, Volume 1. He suspected he was going to need subsequent volumes. The corridor access came through in 6 hours. Vorith 7 knew this because he had not slept in 6 hours, which was unusual for him, because Plethians required precisely 4.2 hours of rest per cycle, and his body had opinions about that schedule. But he had spent the 6 hours between the council session and the first human fleet movement, doing something he had not done in a very long time. He had gone back through every single intelligence report his office had filed on humanity since their provisional admission, and he had read them the way you read something when you suspect the author was a fool. And the author was him. The pattern was obvious in retrospect. Obvious in the way that a thing you walked past every day becomes obvious the moment someone points at it and says, "That's a door." Every human military development report had been filed under regional defense infrastructure. Every construction update had been categorized as domestic security expansion. Every budget figure that seemed larger than expected had been attributed to inefficient allocation, because the assumption, and here, Vorith Ausman paused on this word with genuine professional self-loathing, the assumption had been that humans were inefficient, energetic, friendly, slightly chaotic, and inefficient. They had looked at a species that had spent 10,000 years in continuous, multi-front, overlapping, occasionally simultaneous warfare against itself, had industrialized that warfare, had systematized it, had invented entire academic disciplines around it, had produced literature and philosophy and mathematics specifically from the experience of fighting and losing and adapting and fighting again, and they had filed it under curious but non-threatening. Vorith 7 closed the file. He opened it again. He closed it again. Then his communications array lit up with the first fleet movement report from Sector 14. And he forgot about sleep entirely. The human formation that moved through the corridor access point did not look like any fleet configuration in the Council's tactical database. The Council's database was 400 cycles old and contained the formation data of 67 species. It did not contain this, because this had not existed the last time anyone had checked. Because the last time anyone had checked, they had been filing things under non-threatening. The capital ships moved in what a human tactical officer named Lieutenant Commander Bryn Okafor, who had been attached to the Council observation team, apparently because someone on the human side had decided the Council should have a front-row seat to whatever was about to happen, described as a layered wedge with dynamic anchor points. This meant nothing to Vorith 7. He said so. Okafor, who had the enthusiasm of someone given permission to explain their favorite subject, explained that the formation was designed to be readable as a standard approach pattern from long-range Vorkai sensors, while actually functioning as a three-dimensional net that collapsed inward on contact engagement. "You want them to think they know what you're doing," Vorith 7 said. "We want them to think they know what we're doing," Okafor confirmed, with a smile that Vorith 7 was beginning to recognize as a specifically human category of expression. the one that arrived just before something you would be describing to others for the rest of your life. Drev An had joined the observation team. The Karath counselor had said nothing official about this. He had simply appeared in the observation bay at hour 7, positioned himself at a tactical display, and began watching with the focused attention of a being who had spent 80 years learning to recognize when someone was doing something he had not seen before, and intended to understand it completely. At hour 9, he spoke. "Their sub-capital deployment," he said, without looking away from the display. "The small, fast vessels running the outer perimeter. They are not in a defensive screen configuration." "No," Okafor said. "They are forward of the capital line." "Yes, that is," Drev An said carefully. "Not where sub-capital vessels go. It's where we put them," Okafor said. Drev An was quiet for a moment. Then, "They're the bait." Okafor's smile was its own answer. The Vorkai advance fleet made contact at hour 14. Skrath-Ul's commanders, operating on the tactical doctrine that had carved through 11 systems, identified the human capital formation as a standard approach pattern and responded with their preferred opening move, a massed charge of attack craft, designed to split the enemy line before the capital vessels could establish firing solutions. It was, against every other fleet they had encountered, devastatingly effective. The human sub-capital vessels, which were forward of the capital line, in a place where sub-capital vessels did not go, did not scatter. They contracted, inward, together. And the thing that Vorathazan watched happen in the next 4 minutes was something that Bryn Okafor later described to him as a hammer and anvil, except the hammer and the anvil were both moving, and the Vorkai attack craft were somewhere in the middle of discovering this while it was already too late to have opinions about it. Vorath 7 watched the Vorkai attack craft numbers on the tactical display. They had arrived at 14,300 and some. The counter moved and moved and moved. He looked at Drev An. The Korath's expression was unreadable, which, for a species with 17 distinct facial muscles dedicated to emotional communication, meant that what he was feeling was beyond the available vocabulary of his face. "They practiced this," Drev An said, very quietly. "Not a question. For about 8 cycles," Okafor said, equally quietly. "We've been running simulations since the Vorkai first appeared in Council intelligence reports. Commander Puente's been working this specific engagement scenario for 3 years. 3 years. Vorath 7 thought about what he had been doing 3 years ago. He had been writing a report about human trade integration, which he had concluded with the phrase, "presents no significant strategic variables." He added this to the mental file he was now maintaining on his own comprehensive wrongness. The capital engagement began at hour 16. This was, according to Okafor, the part they were slightly less certain about, which was the most alarming thing a human being had said to Vorath 7 in 9 cycles of interaction, and the competition for that title was fierce. Skrath-Ul's flagship was a vessel that the Council database listed as Class Omega 7, which was the designation reserved for ships that required their own threat assessment subcategory. It was 3 kilometers of weapons platform that had never, in its operational history, been meaningfully damaged in combat. When it fired its primary array, the energy output registered on Vorath 7's display panel from a distance that should have made measurement impossible. Admiral Kwame Asante Barago's flagship was called the Adamantine Coast. It was, by comparison, smaller, it was faster, and it did something, in the opening exchange of the capital engagement, that made Drev An grab the edge of the tactical display with both primary hands and lean forward like the consul personally owed him an explanation. It took the hit, not maneuvered away from it, not deflected it, took it, shields absorbing the strike, and used the 3 seconds that the Vorkai gunners needed to cycle their primary array to close the distance between the 2 vessels from engagement range to what Okafor called, with suspicious casualness, knife range. "Knife range," Vorath 7 repeated. "It's a human thing," Okafor said. "We like to be close." The Vorkai capital doctrine, which had never needed to account for an enemy who would willingly absorb a Class Omega primary strike to get inside its firing solution, did not have a response protocol for what happened next. Asante Birago's fleet, all 412 capital vessels, had watched their admiral take that hit and had understood, because they had practiced this, because Puente had built this, because somewhere in the strategic architecture that Dr. Priya Nambiar had been calmly annotating in a physical document during the most alarming council session in living memory, this moment was accounted for. They surged forward together, not a line advance, a compression. The Vorkai formation, designed to engage at distance, folded inward on itself, trying to accommodate enemies that had simply declined to stay at distance. Skrath-Ul's command channel. The Council observation team had, it emerged, been given access to intercepted Vorkai communications, which raised questions Vorath-7 decided to ask later. Transmitted 3 things in the following 20 minutes. First, a tactical reassessment order. Second, an inquiry to its own fleet commanders as to why the humans were not behaving correctly. Third, and Vorath-7 listened to the translation of this one twice, something that the linguistic AI rendered as a direct question to no one in particular. What are these things? It was, he reflected, a very reasonable question. Just about 9 cycles too late, the battle lasted 31 hours total. Vorath-7 did not sleep for any of them. Neither did Drevan, who had stopped speaking entirely around hour 20 and was simply watching with the total absorption of someone who had decided this was the most important classroom they would ever sit in. The Vorkai fleet, 900 capital vessels, 14,000 sub-capital craft, the military engine that had made 3 species move their planets, did not break all at once. It fractured. The outer formations first, then the midline, and finally at hour 28, the center, when Skrath-Ul's flagship, the Class Omega-7 vessel that had never been meaningfully damaged in combat, went dark. The adamantine coast was still moving when it did. Vorath-7 had specifically looked for it. When Commander Puente's voice came through the observation channel at hour 31 to announce the cessation of active Vorkai resistance in sectors 14 through 23, she sounded, infuriatingly, exactly the same as she had sounded in the council chamber, measured, conversational, like someone finishing a mildly interesting meeting. Sector corridor is clear, she said. We'll begin recovery operations. Council can move relief assets into the reclaimed systems at their discretion. A pause, just long enough to be deliberate. You can come out now. Vorath-7 looked at Okafor. Okafor was smiling. Not the pre-event smile, which had been anticipatory. This one was different, quieter. It was, Vorath-7 realized, the smile of someone who loved the thing they were part of so completely that watching it work correctly felt like watching something sacred. Did she know we were observing the entire engagement? Vorath-7 asked. The commander knows everything that happens in an active operational zone, Okafor said. It's a thing about her. She let us watch. She wanted you to, Okafor said, simply. That was the point. The council session called to receive the engagement report was, at Thesivane Moore's insistence, a closed session. Vorath's men had never attended a closed council session where the noise level exceeded an open one. But humanity, he was learning, redefined his expectations about most categories of experience. Puente delivered the report standing, same as the first time, same lack of notes. Asante Birago sat beside her, apparently having decided that his contribution to the proceedings would be to exist with the quiet solidity of a geographical feature. Dr. Nambiar was reading something again. Vorath-7 had come to understand that this was not inattention. This was how she listened. The numbers were straightforward. Vorkai fleet neutralized. Human losses significant. Puente said this word the way you say a word you have carried for a long time and have decided not to put down, not because it is comfortable, but because it is honest. Reclaimed systems, 11. Skrath-Ul's flagship, captured, not destroyed, which prompted the first question from the floor. Drevan asked it. You took the flagship intact. Why? Evidence, Puente said. tactical data on any remaining Vorkai formations. And because, she paused, and something moved behind her eyes that was not the compressed spring stillness from before. It was older, more complicated. We've learned not to destroy things that might tell you something about what comes next. The room was quiet for a different reason now. Not the alarmed quiet of the first session, something more like the quiet of 47 species simultaneously revising not just an intelligence assessment, but an entire category of assumption. The quiet of a recalibration that went deeper than data. Counselor Seal Vathari spoke carefully. The Council owes the Earth Proxima Coalition a formal acknowledgement. What you have done for the safety of the core systems is without precedent. Puente nodded. We'll take the corridor access as permanent, if that's on the table. Thesivan Mur, the High Arbiter of the Galactic Council, made a sound that took Vorith 7 a moment to identify because he had never heard her make it before. It was unmistakably a laugh, small and exhausted and entirely genuine. Permanent corridor access, she said. Granted. After the session, Vorith 7 found Okafor in the corridor outside the chamber, leaning against the wall, eating something from a small packet, because apparently this was simply what humans did in corridors. Lieutenant Commander, he said. Ambassador, she said. He stood beside her for a moment. The corridor hummed with the ambient noise of a space station going about its business, entirely unaware that the nature of the galaxy had shifted somewhat in the last 31 hours. In 9 cycles of observation, Vorith 7 said, I filed 47 intelligence assessments on human military capacity. I am going to have to rewrite all of them. Probably, Okafor agreed. My professional assessment, going forward, will require a significant foundational revision of my analytical framework. That sounds like a lot of work. It is, he said. I wanted you to know that I intend to do it correctly this time. He paused. I will not be filing anything under non-threatening again. Okafor looked at him sideways and offered the packet. He did not have the appropriate biology to eat from it. He accepted it anyway. For what it's worth, she said, we were never trying to be threatening. We were just preparing. It's what we do. Something about growing up on a planet that was constantly trying to kill us, and then doing the same to each other for several thousand years. She looked back down the corridor. You get comfortable with being ready. Vorith 7 thought about this. He thought about what it meant to be shaped by 10,000 years of fighting and surviving and adapting and building and losing and building again, and to arrive at the galactic stage carrying all of that history inside a form that offered you food and showed you videos and got genuinely delighted when you tried to learn their languages. You are a very strange species, he said. Yeah, Okafor said, without any defensiveness whatsoever. We really are. She pushed off the wall, tucked the packet away, and headed back down the corridor toward the human delegation suite, where Vorith 7 could already hear the sound of multiple voices talking over each other in the way that humans did when they were decompressing, or celebrating, or possibly both simultaneously. Which was probably also a thing about them. He stood in the corridor a moment longer. Then he went back to his office, opened a new file, and began, for the first time in his career, an intelligence assessment that started with the question he should have asked 9 cycles ago. Not what are they, he wrote, but what have they been building toward? He looked at that line for a long time. Then he started writing, and he did not stop until morning.